I'm not very good at speeches like this. I'm much more comfortable talking about engines, equations, timelines, things that can be measured, fixed, or rebuilt if they break. Logic is cleaner. It doesn't ask you how you feel, it just asks whether something works or not. And for a long time, that felt like enough. When you grow up learning to solve problems, you start to treat emotions like noise in the system, something to filter out so you can focus. And when the problems are big, really big, you convince yourself that there isn't room for vulnerability. That feeling slow you down. That explaining yourself is a distraction. So you keep your head down, you work, and you assume that results will eventually explain everything. But results don't explain the human part. They don't explain the nights when doubt creeps in, or the moments when you wonder if the cost is worth it, or the quiet hope that someone somewhere understands why you're doing what you're doing, even if they don't agree with how you do it. I've hidden behind work because it's safe. Rockets don't ask you why you're afraid. Factories don't ask you what you regret. Code doesn't care if you're tired, and when you're trying to push the future forward, hiding inside the work feels justified, necessary even. But over time, you realize that building things without explaining the heart behind them creates distance. People fill in the gaps themselves. They assume motives, they simplify stories, and silence lets those stories harden. So this isn't about changing who I am, it's about admitting that building the future doesn't mean you stop being human. Sometimes the most honest thing you can say is simply this: I've been quiet. Not because I don't care, but because I care more than I knew how to say. There's a weight that comes with seeing the future a little earlier than most people do. Not because it makes you special, but because it makes you responsible. When you can see problems forming decades ahead, you don't get the luxury of ignoring them. You carry them with you, quietly, constantly, even when the room is laughing, even when the headlines move on, even when people assume you're thinking about something else entirely. Most days, that weight doesn't look dramatic. It looks like long timelines, uncomfortable trade-offs, and decisions that won't make sense to anyone for years. It's choosing to work on things that won't pay off quickly, or maybe not in your lifetime at all. It's accepting that if you're right, people won't notice because disaster was avoided. And if you're wrong, everyone will. There's a loneliness in that. When your attention is pulled decades forward, it's hard to fully live in the present. You miss moments. You miss simplicity. You miss being able to say, that's not my problem. But when the problem is energy or extinction risk or the fragility of civilization itself, walking away doesn't feel like an option. It feels like negligence. And the hardest part isn't the work, it's being misunderstood while doing it. Being told you're overreacting, or that you're chasing the wrong priorities, or that you should slow down and enjoy what already exists. It's knowing that by the time everyone agrees the problem is real, it might already be too late to fix it. So you carry the future quietly, you absorb the criticism, you keep going, not because it's noble, but because someone has to take the long view. And once you've seen that horizon, you don't really get to unsee it. At some point, you realize that once you step into the public eye, you stop being a person and start becoming a symbol. People project onto you hopes, frustrations, fears, and then argue with the version they've created. Headlines flatten years of effort into a sentence. A single decision becomes a personality trait, and intent almost never survives the translation. Mistakes get magnified, not because they're unique, but because they're visible. When you're working on hard problems at speed, you will be wrong sometimes. That's not a flaw, it's the cost of learning quickly. But outside the room where the work happens, failure doesn't look like iteration, it looks like recklessness. And explaining the difference is harder than people think. What hurts isn't criticism itself. Criticism is useful, it sharpens thinking. What hurts is being told you're driven by things that were never the motivation. Ego, attention, control. Those are easy stories to tell, and they fit neatly into a tweet. The reality is quieter and less convenient. It's about reducing risk, about trying to bend probability curves in a better direction, about doing something rather than watching things drift toward obvious failure modes. There's also this strange expectation that conviction means certainty, that if you move fast, you must believe you're always right. The truth is almost the opposite. Moving fast usually comes from knowing how fragile things are and how little time there is to get them right. Doubt doesn't slow you down. It pushes you to test, iterate, and improve before reality does it for you. Over time, you learn to accept being misunderstood. You learn that clarity isn't guaranteed and approval isn't the point. You keep going anyway because being misunderstood is uncomfortable, but doing nothing when you could have acted is unbearable. People like to invent simple explanations. Money, power, attention. Those are easy motives to understand, so they get reused a lot. The truth is none of those ever really got me out of bed in the morning. They don't keep you awake at night either. If anything, they're distractions. What actually drives me is a kind of quiet fear, one that doesn't shout but never goes away. The fear that we stagnate, that we settle. That we look back one day and realize we had the tools to do something meaningful and chose comfort instead. That we let obvious problems grow until they became irreversible, simply because fixing them was hard or inconvenient. I've always been less interested in success than in usefulness. Success is fragile. It depends on timing, perception, and luck. Usefulness is different. It's about whether the work actually moves the needle for humanity, even if no one claps for it. Especially if no one claps for it. There's also hope mixed in there. Hope that we don't have to be as fragile as history suggests. That intelligence doesn't have to peak and disappear. That we can build systems strong enough to support curiosity, creativity, and life itself over the long term, not perfectly, but better than before. None of this comes from believing things will magically work out. It comes from believing they won't, unless people take responsibility for pushing the odds in a better direction. Progress isn't automatic, it has to be engineered, and engineering requires commitment long after the novelty wears off. So if there's one thing underneath everything I've built, it's this: a refusal to accept that collapse, limitation, or extinction are just natural. They're not inevitable, they're outcomes. And outcomes can be changed. I'm not chasing greatness, I'm chasing a future that's still worth waking up in. There's a side of this journey that doesn't show up in product launches or progress charts. It's the part where you realize that choosing a mission means quietly unchoosing a lot of other things. Time becomes the rarest resource. Days blur together. Relationships get measured in missed calls and postponed conversations. You tell yourself it's temporary, that you'll make it up later, but later has a way of never quite arriving. A normal life has a certain rhythm to it. Evenings that end on time, weekends that belong to you, moments where your mind isn't running simulations about what could go wrong next. When you decide to build things that operate at the edge of what's possible, that rhythm breaks. The work follows you home. It follows you into sleep. It shows up uninvited during moments that should have been quiet, and there's guilt in that. Guilt about being absent even when you're physically present. Guilt about asking others to accept sacrifices they didn't sign up for. You start to realize that progress has a human cost, and that cost isn't distributed evenly. Some of it lands on the people closest to you. What makes it harder is knowing that stepping back feels irresponsible. When the stakes are high, rest can feel like negligence. You convince yourself that one more push will fix everything, that the finish line is just ahead. But ambitious goals don't really have finish lines, they have horizons. You reach one and another appears. I won't pretend this path is balanced. It isn't. It's a series of trade-offs made in real time, often imperfectly. Some days you get it right, some days you don't, and some things, once missed, don't come back. The truth is, building the future asks for more than effort. It asks for pieces of your life you don't get to reclaim. So why say this now, and why say it to you? Because there comes a moment when building quietly isn't enough anymore, when progress without context starts to feel like distance. For a long time, I believed that if the work mattered, explanations didn't. That if the trajectory was right, the noise would fade. But silence is a cost. It leaves space for assumptions. It lets the story drift away from the truth. This isn't a confession, and it isn't a defense. It's an invitation. An invitation to look at the future not as something abstract or inevitable, but as something deeply personal. Because the future doesn't get built by faceless forces. It gets built by people, imperfect, tired, hopeful people who decide to take responsibility instead of waiting for permission. I'm saying this now because the scale of what we're building has outgrown any one person, any one company, any one voice. The problems ahead are too large to outsource to someone else. Energy, intelligence, survival, these aren't spectator sports. If you care about where humanity is going, you're already part of the process, whether you realize it or not. And I'm saying this to you because belief matters. Not blind belief, earned belief. The kind that asks hard questions, demands accountability, and still chooses to contribute. We don't need agreement on everything. We need alignment on direction. We need more people willing to think long-term, act responsibly, and carry some of the weight. The future isn't going to be gentle. It's going to test us. But it's also going to reward those who show up with courage instead of cynicism. I'm not asking you to follow. I'm asking you to help build, because the future will be shaped either way, and it's better when we carry it together.